Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference for this gracious invitation. Let me begin by saying that this topic of indigenization is indigenization of social sciences is part of a larger topic of decolonization of knowledge. And the idea of decolonization of knowledge began about 70 years ago in the social sciences in the third world. Beginning with the Indians, the Filipinos, the Africans, especially the Nigerians. There had been a movement, several movements to decolonize knowledge. One of these movements was indigenization of the social sciences. But there have been other movements. For example, in the 1980s, we have post-colonial theory. We have the idea of Islamization of knowledge, or we can say sacralization of knowledge, because you also have other religions like Buddhists who speak about Buddhist economics. So we have sacralization of knowledge. We also have the idea of decolonial thought, which started in Latin America and has now become very, it's becoming more and more popular outside of Latin America, in Asia. We have the approach called Asia as Method, which believes in interreferencing within Asian social science communities with the goal of creating new concepts. So there are many perspectives. So I would like to speak about this problem of indigenization. I would like to discuss two issues. Because indigenization is part of the problem of decolonization of knowledge, we have to understand what knowledge needs to be decolonized. The knowledge which needs to be decolonized is Eurocentric knowledge. And therefore we have to understand what we mean by Eurocentrism. What are the specific characteristics of Eurocentrism? Now, the problem is a very serious problem because in our conceptualization, we do not know the names of things. When I say we do not know the names of things, our worldviews have been totally transformed because of 500 years of colonization in which our local traditional knowledge systems have been replaced by Western system of knowledge production. I would like to just give one example. If you remember your history, between the 11th and 13th century, there was a series of wars between Europe and the Muslim world. Do you remember this? What do we call this? What is the name of these wars? Crusades in English. In Arabic? Hurub Salibiyya. In Persian? Jang-Hai Salibi. Turkish? Salib means cross. Okay. So in all our languages, in Malay and Indonesian language also, we use the word salib. Now, this term does not reflect how the Muslims in the past understood this war. The term in Arabic, Hurub Salibiyya, came into use in the 19th century. It was not used by the Muslims during the Crusades. The term crusades or Hurub Salibiyya implies that the war was a war of Christianity against Islam. But this was not the case. During the Crusades, the Muslims did not understand it as a war of Christianity against Islam. They understood it as a war of Europeans against us. And the us included Christians and Jews, because Christians and Jews were also living in Palestine, and their land was also conquered. So the Muslims in the past did not call it Hurub Salibiyah. They called it, they did not call the Crusaders, what we call the Crusaders, they did not call them Crusaders. They did not refer to the Europeans as Christians. They refer to them as Franks, Faranj or Ifranj. See? So, but because we have replaced the terminology with crusade, we give a distorted image of the war as if it was a war, or it was understood by the Muslims as a war of Christianity versus Islam. And we also have to remember that the Crusaders, when they came on their way to Palestine, they also killed Eastern Christians. So it was not, simply a Muslim-Christian war. So this is just an example, and we can find many other examples in the social sciences where we do not know the names of things because they have been replaced by terminology and concepts from the Western social sciences. So there is a loss of knowledge. Eurocentrism means there is a loss of knowledge, and it means that we do not have alternative forms of knowledge in order to deal with our political problems, with our environmental problems, with all kinds of problems. So I would like to just discuss two characteristics or two traits of Eurocentrism. And after that, I will give an example from Ibn Khaldon of what it means to decolonize knowledge. Now, there are many traits or characteristics of Eurocentrism. But I would like to focus on one trait. Now, this is the trait which I call the subject-object dichotomy. In this subject-object dichotomy, the European is the knowing subject, and the non-European, the Asian, the African, is merely an object of study, an object of analysis. He does not create knowledge. You can see this difference in the distinction between sociology and anthropology. Sociology is the study of humanitas. Anthropology is the study of anthropos. Anthropos is man, but primitive man. Primitive man does not think, does not create concepts, does not create knowledge. So when the Europeans founded anthropology, it was meant to be different from sociology, because in sociology it is a study of Western civilization, humanitas, which creates knowledge. Whereas anthropos does not create knowledge. Anthropos is merely an object of study by Western man. So this divide between sociology and anthropology is part of the problem of Eurocentrism. And therefore, it is perhaps strange that in the Muslim world and in the third world, we also adopt anthropology as a field of study. Because if you look at Ibn Khaldon, for example, his science, ilm al-ijtima' al-insani, insan refers to Muslims, Arabs, Berbers, Jews, everyone. There is no distinction in terminology between Muslims and the other. Whereas in the West, Western people are humanitas, non-Western people are anthropos. Humanitas is civilized, rational. Anthropos is barbaric, primitive, and irrational. So this is part of the problem. So the result is the social sciences have no conceptual terminology, no conceptual apparatus derived from the non-Western world. The concepts from Muslim societies, for example, do not exist in the social sciences. There is this problem of marginalization. What is ideas, concepts, theories, and thinkers from the Muslim world, from the third world in general, are excluded from the history of sociology, of the social sciences. They're excluded in the whole process of knowledge creation and concept formation. To give you an example, most of the scholars who study Ibn Khaldun study Ibn Khaldun for his facts and information about North Africa. But very few scholars have created a theoretical framework from Ibn Khaldun to create knowledge and to apply the theoretical framework to different historical and empirical cases. So actually, Professor Recep Şentürk, who is here with us today, had started a series of symposia. I had participated in some of them in Istanbul and started the International Ibn Khaldun Society, where we tried to pay attention. We have been trying to pay attention to this problem of looking at Ibn Khaldun not as an object of study, but as a subject, a means through which we view the world, using Khaldunian concepts, creating theoretical frameworks, and applying them to concrete, empirical, historical cases. So the problem with Eurocentrism, therefore, the problem with the subject-object dichotomy is that the non-European, the non-Western is marginalized. But beyond that, beyond the marginalization, the domination by Western concepts results in a distortion of reality, a distorted understanding of reality. Let me give you an example of that. Again, from Ibn Khaldun. Two central concepts in Ibn Khaldun are Hadara and Badawa. Now, many scholars understand this distinction. They understand this distinction in terms of rural and urban. And this happens even with Arab scholars that I've sometimes come across in conversations or their readings. Now here you have a problem of Eurocentrism, because in the European mind, the big distinction, the important distinction is between town and country. European history is about the relationship between town and country. The fall of feudalism, the rise of capitalism is due to the conflict between town and country. So the most fundamental dichotomy in Western social science is between town and country. Now that dichotomy is imposed on Ibn Khaldun's dichotomy, Badawa, Umran Badawi and Umran Hadari. That dichotomy is imposed, and therefore it is imagined that Ibn Khaldun is talking about the relationship between town and country. But actually this is wrong, because Umran Badawi is a nomadic society, and Umran Hadari is sedentary society, and the sedentary society, Umran Hadari, includes town and country together. So here you have a clear problem of translating Ibn Khaldun with Orientality. It's what I call the Orientality of translation. That there is an Orientalism in the translation, because when you translate Hadari and Badawi, you translate in terms of, through the lens of Europe, through the mind of the Europeans. And, you know, as I said, we can find many examples of how reality is interpreted, how concepts are interpreted, how concepts are translated, how concepts are understood, because we are looking at them through the lens of Europe. So, let me give you another example of this problem of Eurocentrism. In my part of the world, I come from Malaysia, Indonesia. When we try to understand society, pre-colonial society, we use Western terms like feudalism. Now, a Western term like feudalism, to understand political economy of a society, it is based on land. It's what we call terra-centric. I don't know whether you can understand what I mean by terra-centric. It is land-centric. Yes? Terra-centric. Terra meaning land. Yeah. Now, in my part of the world, people live not only on land, they also live on the sea. You see? In the Maghreb, in North Africa, people live, the Badawi live in the desert. But in my part of the world, people, they are Badawi but on the sea. They are moving. They are not Hadari, they are not settled. They are moving, they are nomadic, but they live on the sea. So they are sea nomads. Sometimes they are referred to as sea nomads. So when you try to understand the political economy of certain parts of the Malay world or certain parts of Southeast Asia, the main distinction is not town and country, it is between land and sea. The land people and the sea people, right? So if you come with European terminology, you will not understand what is happening and you will not capture the reality of our part of the world. So this is the problem of Eurocentrism. Now, if you take the example of religion, the study of religion, the anthropological, the sociological study of religion is completely based on terminology from Christianity. If you study in Europe, if you study French, English texts, and these texts are translated into Arabic, into Persian, into Malay, into Urdu, if you study all these writings, they may study different religions, but the conceptual terminology comes from Christianity. Terms like church, sect, denomination, cult, and so on and so forth, they all come from Christianity. This is because for almost 1800 years, the Latin term religio, religion, it meant Christianity. It referred to Christianity. It's only in the 19th century that the Europeans started to use religio to refer to Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and other religions. But when they said Islam is a religion, they looked at Islam through the lens of Christianity, through the perspective of Christianity. So there was a kind of Christianization, intellectual Christianization, because their concepts were Christian. So, for example, they believe that the mosque plays a similar role in Islam as the church plays in Christianity. So, this is an example of distortion. So, we can see that there are many serious problems arising from the subject-object dichotomy when you fail to consider the Muslims as knowing subjects, as Ibn Khaldon, as Al-Biruni, as Al-Farabi, as Al-Mawardi and all these scholars as knowing subjects who have concepts and theoretical frameworks that we need to apply. If we do not consider this, then there will forever be this problem of marginalization and distortion. Therefore, when we speak of indigenization, or when we speak of decolonization, it means removing the subject-object dichotomy. It means that we do not think about Ibn Khaldun using Karl Marx or Max Weber, but we think about reality with Ibn Khaldun, and we may include Karl Marx and Max Weber if they are helpful. In other words, we must regard Ibn Khaldun as a subject, as a knowing subject, and not merely as an object of study. It means that we have to develop a Khaldunian theoretical framework and apply his theoretical framework to empirical cases. Developing a theoretical framework from Khaldunian concepts like dawla, hilf, wala, nasab, asabiya, hadari, badawi, and so on and so forth. And then to look at historical cases. For example, my own interest, I looked at the case of the rise and decline of the Safavi state in Iran. Now, can we speak of the asabiya of the tariqa Safawiya in Khaldunian terms? Can we speak of the rise of the Saudi state in Khaldunian terms? Because the Saudi state, you know, the first Saudi state was formed based on an alliance of a group of tribes known as the Ikhwan, with the overall asabiya provided by the Wahhabiyya ideology, right? So can we understand this in Khaldunian terms? Can we understand the strength or the resilience of the Syrian state also in Khaldunian terms? So there are many areas. Can we understand the Mongol, the Mughal conquest of, the Turkic Mughal conquest of India in Khaldunian terms? Can we understand the Mongol conquest of China in Khaldunian terms? There's a vast period of history for which we can use Ibn Khaldun to understand the rise and decline of states. Now, when we try to develop Khaldunian concepts or indigenous concepts, we have to take those concepts seriously. It means we have to take the language seriously. I'm saying this because when I've seen books on sociology or anthropology in different languages, in Malay language, in Arabic, or even in Persian, I see that the local language, Arabic or Persian or Malay, is being used, but the conceptualization is Western. For example, the other day I was looking at an anthropology text. Now this anthropology text, it's in Arabic, it's an introduction to anthropology. There is a chapter on society. A chapter on society. And this chapter is explaining what is the meaning of society. But in the definition and the explanation of the meaning of society, this chapter is referring to Malinowski, Evans, Pritchard, who are the other, Kruber, Alfred Kruber, and you know, all these European and American anthropologists, which is okay. This is okay. It's important to do that. But the author is not interested in the meaning of mujtama, in the roots of mujtama. What is the meaning? So in other words, according to the Arabs and according to Arab tradition, what does mujtama mean? And what's the relationship between mujtama and ijtima? Of course, in the early days, the mujtama was not used. Ibn Khaldun used ijtima. And how is this related to the root of jama'ah? So what is the Arab Islamic conception of society? but they don't take the language seriously. The language is simply used to translate, right? The language is not taken as a source of conceptualization. And I think if you look at Persian, you look at an introduction to anthropology, probably you'll find the same thing. In Malay language, we have the same problem. Probably in Turkish also the same problem. So the whole question of indigenization has to do with concept formation, which means going to tradition and taking our language seriously. So I have been speaking about theory so far, theory and concepts, but I want to say something also about methodology. Because when we look at Ibn Khaldun, we find that he provides not only a theory, a theoretical perspective for the study of societies, but he also provides a methodology. He also, he doesn't give a new methodology, but he uses methods in a way that is important for us to learn from. In modern social science, there's only one method. It's what in Islamic tradition we call burhan. Burhan meaning deduction. It could also include induction, but generally deduction is the preferred method of argumentation. In English, burhan means demonstration. Now in Islamic tradition, and also following the Greeks, and in Islamic tradition and in medieval Christian European tradition, burhan is only one method of argumentation. Mantiq includes burhan, it also includes shi'r, jadal, and khitaba, right? So dialectics, poetics, and rhetoric. Now, modern social science has narrowly defined scientific production, has narrowly defined methods. It's restricted methods to burhan, to demonstration. But we have to realize that there are other valid methods of argumentation, there are other valid methods to make truth claims other than burhan. Now, if we look at Ibn Khaldun, we find that he uses at least three methods. In his critique of history, he uses jada, dialectics. But in his development of sociology, his development of ilm al-ijtima' al-insani, he uses burhan. He uses istidlal. What do you call it? Deduction. Of course, this is his main method. Deduction is based on the application of certain premises, certain axioms, what Ibn Khaldun calls muqaddimat. So there are 6 main muqaddimat in the muqaddimah. So these are the main premises from which all his arguments result. So that's why we say it's a deductive argument. So we say, like the people of the past, that we don't restrict ourselves to demonstration. The scientific method should not be restricted to demonstration, because we may use literature, we may use poetry, we may use art in order to make truth claims, in order to as I said, to make a truth claim. So Ibn Khaldun used jadal, he used burhan, and he also used khitaba. The muqaddimah is full of khitaba, full of rhetorical statements that help us that are intended to persuade us about the truth that he's trying to convey to us. So, for example, in one part of the muqaddimah, Ibn Khaldun says, mar'a jahil bain al-anam wakhimun wabilun. So, the pasture of stupidity, he's referring to the pasture of stupidity. He's referring to the historians as being, on this mar'a jahil. So this is, you can say this is a rhetorical device. Yeah, it is putting the historians at the level of these animals. So there are many such devices that he uses in the Muqaddimah. So we learn, in other words, from Ibn Khaldun, if we take him seriously, there are theoretical lessons and there are methodological lessons. Now, I think the problem for us, or in the Muslim world, but especially in the Arab world, is that there are thinkers from the tradition which have not been taken seriously. So until now, generally, we can say we do not have a Khaldunian sociology. In order to develop Khaldunian sociology, you must have generations of scholars who study Ibn Khaldun, theoretically and conceptually. Just as in Marxism, for example, you have Marx and Engels, and then you had the second generation which studied and critiqued Marx and Engels, and then you had the third and fourth generations which disagreed on many things, so different schools of Marxism developed. But we don't have the same situation with Ibn Khaldun, because Ibn Khaldun had very few followers in his time. The most important, two of the most important followers was Al-Azraq in Andalusia and Maqdisi in Egypt. These are the two of the most important followers of Ibn Khaldun. But there were not enough of followers, so no school of Khaldunian sociology developed. Of course, about 2 centuries after Ibn Khaldun's death, Ottomans became interested in Ibn Khaldun. But then again, we didn't see the development of a Khaldunian school of ilm al-ijtima' al-insani, which developed in that context. And today, in the modern period, it is the same situation. So we continue to repeat the idea that Ibn Khaldun founded sociology. He's the first sociologist, but we have not gone beyond that claim to develop Khaldunian sociology. And I have to say that even the scholars who speak about Islamization of knowledge did not pay much attention to Ibn Khaldun. Those who speak about Islamizing sociology or Islamic sociology have not spoken much about Ibn Khaldun. The same can be said about Al-Biruni. Al-Biruni can be regarded as the first comparativist, the comparative study of religion. He lived for 13 years in India, and he studied the religions of India. And he compared the religions of India with Islam, especially with the Sufi tradition. And he was very conscious of having an objective method to study the religions of India, because he knew that he should not impose an Islamic bias on the study of their religions. So he was, you could say, the first comparative scholar of religion, and also an anthropologist, because he was studying the other. He was studying the other, but with an objective methodology. But there has been even fewer works on Al-Biruni in comparison to Ibn Khaldun, even fewer works on Al-Biruni that attempt to develop his methodological and theoretical framework. So we see that our task for indigenizing is a very big task. It means not only organizing conferences like this, these are of course very important, but it also means normalizing the discourse on indigenization in our teaching. In other words, if we teach, let's say, sociological theory in our universities, we should begin with Ibn Khaldon, or we should begin with Al-Biruni actually. A course on sociological theory, Introduction to Sociological Theory, should include various Muslim and non-Western scholars as well as the Western scholars. So, for example, Al-Biruni, Ibn Khaldun, and then I would include Marx and Weber and Durkheim, of course. I would also include Binoy Kumar Sarkar, who was writing around the early 1900s in India. He was an original sociologist. I would include Jose Rizal, who was a Filipino thinker. He wrote towards the end of the 19th century. He was one of the first critiques of Orientalism, one of the first critiques of colonial knowledge. And this is the end of the 19th century, so it is quite early. I would also include some women founders of sociology or social thought or social sciences. You see, our problem is not only Eurocentrism, it's also androcentrism. Androcentrism meaning male bias, right? For example, one of the most important women in sociology, her name was Harriet Martineau. She was British, and she lived during the same time as Auguste Comte. And she wrote about society, she theorized about society, but she is only known as the translator of Auguste Comte. When you read many books or many articles, they will say that Harriet Martineau was a translator of Auguste Comte. But they don't talk about Harriet Martineau as a social thinker in her own right. So there's also, not only Eurocentric bias, there's also a male bias in the way we think about the history of sociology. So we have to include non-Western, Muslim, Asian, African thinkers, and we also have to include women thinkers when we teach. So one thing is when we teach to include these non-Western thinkers, and secondly, to pay attention to concepts. When you introduce the concept of ijtima or mujtama to your students, to our students, don't only explain the concept of mujtama in terms of society or the French société or the German Gesellschaft. Look also at the roots in the Arab tradition. What does ijtima mean? What does ijtima mean in the works of Ibn Khaldun and Al-Biruni and the early scholars? And the same thing goes for all the other terms that we use in the sociology and other social sciences. And we have to write textbooks, we have to rewrite textbooks. Textbooks that, Introduction to Sociology, which starts, as I said, with Al-Biruni and Ibn Khaldun and Jose Rizal and Binoy Kumar Sarkar and so on and so forth. Scholars in the Arab world should be familiar with thinkers in other parts of the third world. They should be familiar with the Indian thinkers, with the Filipino thinkers, with the Latin American thinkers. This should be part of our social science socialization, should be part of our upbringing in the social sciences. Just as we know Marx, Weber and Durkheim so well, an Arab sociology student should know Al-Biruni and Ibn Khaldun very well, and he should know Binoy Kumar Sarkar, the Indian sociologist, Jose Rizal, the Filipino sociologist, and so on. Gilberto Freire, the Brazilian sociologist, who was writing about 80 or 90 years ago. This should be part of our education system. It is only when it is part of our education system that we can say that we have indigenized sociology. As long as it is not part of our education system, we cannot say that we have indigenized sociology. We will only be talking about the need for indigenization. Well, we have to stop talking about the need for indigenization. We have to proceed with the work of indigenization, which is identifying the scholars, the theorists of our tradition, and engaging in the process of concept formation and theory building. I would like to end with a point that when we speak about indigenization, as I said, the context is the problem of Eurocentrism. And there is a strong Eurocentric bias in the social sciences. But let us also remember that there are three other biases in the social sciences which we have to deal with. One bias I mentioned already is the androcentric bias, the male bias. And in many countries, you have the rise of feminist social thought, feminist theory, feminist standpoint theory. You have gyno-criticism in the field of literature, which attempts, a feminist reading of literature. These are very important developments, which I think should also be taken into account when we speak about the problem of decolonizing knowledge. The two other biases that we face, on the one hand you have Eurocentrism, on the other hand you have a kind of Islamism. You have a kind of Islamism in which there is a hostile attitude towards the social sciences. Among certain circles in the Islamist movements, they take a hostile attitude towards the social sciences. They consider the social sciences as antagonistic to theology. So for example, they say a sociological explanation of the rise of Islam is against Islam. It's against a theological explanation. Or they say that social science, especially sociology, brings in radical ideas, it brings in Marxism, it brings in feminist thoughts, and these ideas are haram as far as Islamic tradition is concerned. And they also suggest that these sciences are all based on secular ideologies, and therefore they should be put aside. They are created, invented, founded in the West, and they're not relevant to us, and we should put them aside. So we also have to be aware of the problem of Islamism as a bias that affects knowledge production in many of our countries. And I would like to give you I would like to give you an example of this problem of what I call Islamism, in the way it distorts reality and distorts our understanding. In Malaysia today, we are facing the problem of persecution of Shiites. Last month, month of Muharram, the police, the religious authorities would go to people's homes of Shiites where they are, having majlis for Ashura, and they were detained. They were stopped from their majlis, and they were detained and prevented from proceeding. Now, one of the unscientific approaches to dealing with the Shiites has been the spread of this idea that Shiism is not Islam. It is a religion created by the Yemeni Jew Abdullah ibn Sabah. Maybe you have heard this. I don't know whether you have heard this, right? This is well known. Now, the Islamists are spreading, certain Islamists, generally Salafis, and some Sunnis influenced by Salafism, because in Sunni tradition, of course, we don't believe in this idea that Shiism is created by the Yemeni Jew Abdullah ibn Sabah. But some Sunnis influenced by this myth are spreading these ideas. So here you have mythical ideas being spread by certain groups of Islamists, and these are coming into conflict with a proper historical social scientific approach. If we take an historical social scientific approach, we know that Abdullah ibn Sabah was probably a mythical figure, and even if he was not a mythical figure, he was not the person who created the Ithna Ashariya or Ja'fari school, right? Some of the Sunnis say that Abdullah ibn Sabah is the founder of the Saba'iyya. You find this in Shahrastani, Al-Milal wal-Nihal, but not the creation of Shi'ism. So here you can see the clash between Islamism and social science. And then the last problem that we have, the last bias that we have, Eurocentrism, androcentrism, Islamism, and the last one is the state. The state. Because the state in many of our countries interferes with knowledge production. In some states it is worse than others. For example, the state may ban certain scholars from speaking. It has happened in some countries in the Muslim world. It happens all the time. A scholar is invited from another country. The day before he arrives, he is told that he will not be allowed into that country. He will not be given a visa because the government is not happy with his views, right? Foreigners are banned from speaking. Or in the case where you are a citizen of that country, you are not allowed to speak. You are lucky if you are not simply not allowed to speak. But if you are put in jail, or if you are fired from your job, yes? In Iran you have, sorry to say, you have mamnu at-tadris. You have this thing. Is that correct? Mamnu at-tadris. Yes? Prohibited from teaching. Of course, I don't mean to single out Iran because this happens in many Muslim countries. So we do have a serious problem. Our problem is not only Eurocentrism, which is the external problem. There's also the internal problem, which we have to take seriously if we are really to develop a social scientific culture, an intellectual culture. I will end by telling you the story of the Ijaza. We started late, so the time shouldn't be taken from me, you know. Especially I came all the way from very far. Well, I mean, this is, if I may say, this is also part of the problem. We are trying to have a serious discussion, but then, you know, is it so important to stick to the time? Because, you know, we can have lunch late and we can have dinner a little bit late also. Huh? Well, I mean, I wanted to say that in the early Muslims, when they gave the ijaza, when the sheikh gave the ijaza to the murid, you know, he gives ijaza bihaqqa riwaya to the murid. The ijaza is given by the sheikh, not by the institution. There is academic freedom because the sheikh decides what to teach. No institution can tell the sheikh what to teach or what not to teach. But when the Europeans adopted the system of the Jamia or the Kulliya in Europe, they adopted the ijaza system and they call it licence. Licence is a translation of ijaza. When they adopted it, they put the licence in the hands of the Pope, the church. The church gave the ijaza, not the sheikh, not the teacher in Europe. In Oxford University, in Cambridge University, in all these universities, the ijaza, the licence is granted by the Pope. And the Pope can decide which books can be taught, which books cannot be taught. So there was lesser academic freedom in Europe in those days compared to the Muslim world. Now, we have Christianized our education system. We make Ministry of Education. We centralize knowledge production. The degree is granted by the university, not by the sheikh, not by the ustad. And the Ministry of Education, the government, may tell the professors what you're allowed to teach and what you're not allowed to teach. This is un-Islamic. But we are doing this everywhere in the Muslim world. Ministers of education, the government, may say, this is not allowed, that is not allowed. You may not teach this, you may not teach that. This doesn't exist in Islamic tradition. So if we want to deal with Eurocentrism and we want to really indigenize the social sciences, we have to deal not only with Eurocentrism but also with our own internal problems. Thank you very much.